The best code review is the one where nobody pushes back. Not because your code is perfect, but because the reviewer never had time to find the problems. This sounds like a bug in the system. It is. And GitHub just shipped a feature designed to fix it, by making every review so small that skipping it actually becomes impossible. Here's what normally happens. A developer disappears for 2 weeks, writes 3,000 lines of code, and opens a pull request the size of a small novel. The reviewer opens it, sees the file count, and experiences something that should probably have a clinical name by now. They leave a comment about a variable name. They approve. The 3,000-line architectural rewrite ships on a prayer. This isn't laziness, it's math. Research on code review behavior shows thoroughness drops sharply after about 400 lines. Your brain is essentially a GPU with a VRAM limit. Feed it too much context at once and it starts dropping frames. Understanding a massive change in one sitting is not a willpower problem. It's a working memory problem, and no amount of coffee has ever solved a working memory problem. Stacked pull requests, sometimes called stacked diffs, solve this by enforcing a different shape of work. Instead of one 3,000-line behemoth, you write a series of small, focused changes, each building directly on the last. PR1 refactors the data model. PR2, which literally depends on PR1 merging first, adds the new endpoint. PR3 wires up the front end. Each one reviewable in under 10 minutes. Each one actually reviewed. The tricky part, until now, was the dependency chain. If PR1 needed a change, everything downstream needed rebusing. Companies like Facebook and Google had internal tooling for this for years. The open-source world built workarounds like Graphite and Stack. But for most teams, stacked PRs meant manually juggling branches like a circus act performed entirely in a terminal, with no net. GitHub's native stacked PR support changes the dependency graph entirely. You mark a PR as depending on another, and GitHub tracks the whole chain. When a base changes, GitHub knows what needs updating. Reviewers see only the incremental diff between one PR and the next, not the entire accumulated history of your decisions. The dependency is explicit rather than living as a Slack message that gets buried under a thread about the office snack budget. Think of it like writing a book by submitting one chapter at a time instead of handing your editor a full manuscript and then leaving the country. The feedback loop shrinks. The cognitive load per review stays manageable. You catch the bad structural decisions in Chapter 2 before you've built 6 more chapters on top of them. The stack is a forcing function. It makes you think in layers before you think in systems. The real insight is that this is a culture change wearing a tooling hat. Stacked PRs don't just make reviews easier, they reshape how you think while writing code. Small, composable, independently comprehensible units. It turns out that when you're forced to explain each change to a reviewer one step at a time, you actually understand what you're building. Which is a sentence that probably stings a little if you've shipped something you couldn't fully explain. GitHub had this problem internally for years. Their own engineers were using workarounds. The tooling now matches the workflow the best teams were already running by hand. The question was never whether stacked PRs improve code review. The evidence has been sitting in internal tooling at the world's top engineering organizations for a decade. The real question is whether your team is disciplined enough to stop treating a pull request like a place to park everything you've been thinking about for 2 weeks. That's not a GitHub problem. That's a you problem. GitHub just made it easier to do better. Strip away the tooling announcement and here's what remains. The 400-line review limit isn't a quirk, it's a ceiling, and every engineering team has been quietly bumping against it for years. Stacked PRs don't remove that ceiling, they route around it by never asking you to go near it. The dependency chain is now explicit. The incremental diff is now the unit of judgment. The structural mistake gets caught in Chapter 2, not after the manuscript is printed. Facebook and Google solved this internally a decade ago. The gap between what the best teams were doing and what the tools supported just quietly closed. What strikes us isn't the feature, it's the line GitHub buried at the end of their own announcement. Their internal engineers were already running workarounds. The tooling they shipped to the world is the tooling they needed themselves. We find that honest in a way most product launches aren't. But it also raises something we keep coming back to: if the discipline to write small, composable, independently reviewable changes is the real unlock and the evidence for that has been sitting in plain sight for a decade, then what exactly were we waiting for permission to do?